The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as 22-year-old Sarah Martinez stepped out of the dusty pickup truck that had brought her from the nearest town. Her worn jeans and faded t-shirt stood in stark contrast to the crisp uniform surrounding her. She clutched a small duffel bag containing everything she owned and a letter that had changed her life forever. Colonel James Harrison was reviewing training schedules in his office when his aide knocked on the door. "Sir, there's a young woman here claiming she has orders to report for special operations training." The aide's voice carried barely concealed amusement. Harrison looked up from his paperwork, his weathered face showing the skepticism of a man who had spent 30 years in the military. "Send her in," he said, already mentally preparing to explain why she had made a mistake. Sarah entered the office and stood at attention as best she knew how. Her posture was imperfect, her salute amateur, but her eyes held a determination that caught Harrison's attention for just a moment before his professional judgment kicked in. "Miss Martinez, I presume?" Harrison said, not bothering to stand. "There seems to be some confusion. This is a Navy SEAL training facility. We don't train civilians, and we certainly don't train young women who have never served a day in their lives." Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out the letter. "Sir, I have orders here signed by Admiral Roberts. My father served under him in Afghanistan before he died. The Admiral promised that if I could prove myself capable, I would be given a chance to honor my father's memory through service." Harrison took the letter and read it twice, his frown deepening. The orders were legitimate, signed by one of the most respected admirals in the Navy. But the whole situation seemed absurd to him. This girl looked like she belonged in college, not in the most demanding military training program in the world. "Miss Martinez," Harrison said slowly, "do you have any idea what Navy SEAL training involves? These men train for years to reach the level where they can even attempt our programs. They are elite soldiers, warriors who have proven themselves in combat situations you couldn't even imagine." Sarah's voice remained steady despite the dismissive tone. "I understand the challenges, sir. I've been preparing for this opportunity my entire life. My father taught me everything he learned during his service before he was killed in action. I know I don't look like much, but I'm asking for the chance to prove myself." The colonel leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. Her confidence seemed genuine, but it also seemed dangerously naive. He had seen countless recruits break down during the first week of basic training, grown men with military experience who couldn't handle the pressure. The idea of putting this inexperienced young woman through the same program seemed almost cruel. "Your father's service is respected and appreciated," Harrison said finally. "But that doesn't change the reality of what we do here. Our training is designed to push the absolute limits of human endurance and capability. Men who have served in combat zones for years sometimes fail to complete our programs." Sarah stepped forward slightly, her voice gaining strength. "Sir, I'm not asking for special treatment or easier standards. I'm asking for the same chance you would give any recruit. Judge me by my performance, not by what you think I can or cannot do." Harrison stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where his current class of SEAL candidates was running through obstacle courses. Every single one of them was a hardened military veteran with years of experience. The contrast between them and the young woman standing in his office could not have been more stark. "Miss Martinez, let me be completely honest with you," he said without turning around. "In my 30 years of service, I have never seen a woman successfully complete Navy SEAL training. The physical demands alone would be overwhelming for someone of your size and apparent experience level. Add to that the mental pressure, the sleep deprivation, the constant stress of proving yourself worthy of the SEAL Brotherhood, and I think you would find yourself in a situation far beyond your capabilities." The silence in the room stretched for several seconds before Sarah spoke again. "Sir, my father used to tell me that the military judges people by what they can do, not by what others think they should be able to do. He said that in combat, results are the only thing that matters." Harrison turned back to face her, surprised by the quiet conviction in her voice. There was something about her demeanor that reminded him of some of the best soldiers he had known, a quality that was difficult to define but impossible to ignore when it was present. "Your father was a good man and a good soldier," Harrison admitted. "But good intentions and family legacy don't qualify someone for SEAL training. We have specific standards and requirements that exist for very good reasons." Sarah nodded respectfully but didn't back down. "I understand your concerns, sir, but the orders from Admiral Roberts are clear. He believed I deserved this chance based on what I've already accomplished. I'm not asking you to lower your standards or make exceptions. I'm asking you to apply the same standards to me that you would apply to anyone else." The colonel found himself in an impossible position. The orders were legitimate and came from someone whose judgment he respected. But every instinct he had developed over decades of military service told him that this would end badly for everyone involved. Yet there was something about Sarah's quiet confidence that gave him pause. "Miss Martinez," he said finally, "if we proceed with this, you will receive no special consideration whatsoever. You will be held to the same standards as every other candidate. When you fail, and I believe you will fail quickly, you will be sent home immediately with no second chances and no appeals process." Sarah's face remained composed, showing neither fear nor false bravado. "I understand completely, sir. That's all I've ever asked, for the chance to succeed or fail on my own merits." Harrison realized that this conversation had already gone further than he had intended. The smart thing would be to find a way to redirect her to a more appropriate program, but the orders in his hand made that option complicated. Against his better judgment, he found himself considering what would happen if he actually gave her the chance she was requesting. The next morning arrived with the harsh sound of reveille echoing across the base at 500 hours. Sarah had spent the night in temporary quarters, barely sleeping as she mentally prepared for whatever tests awaited her. She had been told to report to the training grounds at 600, dressed in the standard issue clothing that had been provided the previous evening. Colonel Harrison stood with his arms crossed as Sarah jogged onto the training field. Around them, 24 Navy SEAL candidates were assembled in perfect formation. These men had already been training for weeks, their bodies hardened by constant physical challenges and their minds sharpened by relentless pressure. They looked at Sarah with expressions ranging from curiosity to open skepticism. "Gentlemen," Harrison announced in his commanding voice, "we have a new candidate joining us today. Miss Martinez will be participating in today's evaluation exercises under the same standards that apply to all of you." He paused and looked directly at Sarah. "There will be no modifications to accommodate anyone's perceived limitations." Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, Harrison's senior training instructor, stepped forward with a clipboard. He was a compact man with the lean build of someone who had spent years in special operations. His face showed the weathered look of someone who had seen combat in multiple theaters, and his eyes held the intensity of a professional soldier who took training very seriously. "Today's evaluation consists of 3 phases, Rodriguez announced. "Physical fitness assessment, obstacle course completion, and marksmanship testing. Failure to meet minimum standards in any phase results in immediate dismissal from the program." His gaze lingered on Sarah for a moment longer than the others. The first phase began with a 2-mile run in full gear. Sarah had positioned herself near the back of the group, knowing that trying to keep pace with experienced soldiers from the beginning would likely result in early burnout. The other candidates set a punishing pace, their breathing controlled and their movements efficient despite the weight of their equipment. Sarah focused on maintaining her own rhythm, drawing on years of long-distance running that she had used to prepare for this moment. Her father had taught her that endurance was as much about mental discipline as physical conditioning. As the group rounded the halfway point, she was surprised to find herself moving up through the pack rather than falling behind. The SEALs began to notice that the young woman they had expected to see struggling was instead maintaining a steady pace that seemed almost effortless. Her breathing remained controlled, and her form showed none of the deterioration that typically affected candidates under stress. By the time they reached the final quarter mile, Sarah was running alongside the lead group. Rodriguez checked his stopwatch as the candidates crossed the finish line. Sarah's time was well within the required standard, placing her in the top third of the group. The sergeants exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this level of performance from someone they had assumed would struggle with basic requirements. The obstacle course presented a different type of challenge. It required not just endurance but also upper body strength, coordination, and the ability to problem-solve under pressure. The course included rope climbs, wall traverses, cargo net crossings, and a series of tunnels that had to be navigated while carrying equipment. Sarah watched the first few candidates tackle the course, studying their techniques and nodding where they encountered difficulties. When her turn came, she approached each obstacle methodically, using her smaller size to her advantage where possible and relying on technique rather than brute strength where necessary. The rope climb had eliminated several candidates in previous evaluations, but Sarah's approach was different from the others. Instead of trying to muscle her way up through arm strength alone, she used a technique her father had taught her that distributed the effort more efficiently across her entire body. She reached the top faster than several of the male candidates who outweighed her by 50 pounds or more. The wall traverse required candidates to move along a horizontal barrier using only their hands and arms. Sarah's lighter weight worked in her favor here, allowing her to move more quickly than candidates who were fighting against their own body mass. She completed the section without the multiple rest stops that had slowed down some of the others. Colonel Harrison watched from his observation post, his expression becoming increasingly thoughtful. This was not unfolding the way he had anticipated. Sarah's performance was not just adequate, it was actually competitive with candidates who had significantly more training and experience. The final obstacle was a crawl through a series of low tunnels while carrying a 40-pound pack. The tunnels were designed to simulate moving through confined spaces under combat conditions, and they had been the downfall of many candidates who discovered they were claustrophobic or simply couldn't manage the physical demands of the exercise. Sarah disappeared into the first tunnel and emerged several minutes later at the other end, her uniform dirty but her pace steady. She had completed the entire obstacle course within the time limit and without any failures that would have resulted in automatic elimination. Sergeant Rodriguez approached Colonel Harrison as the candidates prepared for the final phase of testing. "Sir, I have to say this is not what I expected. Her technique is solid, and she's obviously been training seriously for this. She's not just surviving these exercises, she's actually performing well." Harrison nodded slowly, his preconceptions beginning to shift despite his best efforts to remain objective. "Let's see how she handles the marksmanship portion. That's where we'll really see what she's made of. Technical shooting skills can't be faked or compensated for through determination alone." The shooting range was set up with targets at various distances, requiring candidates to demonstrate proficiency with multiple weapons systems under different conditions. This was often where candidates who had performed well in physical exercises discovered that they lacked the specialized skills necessary for special operations work. Sarah approached the firing line with the same quiet confidence she had shown throughout the day. She accepted the rifle from the range instructor and took a few moments to familiarize herself with the weapon, checking the action and adjusting the sights with movements that suggested prior experience. The first set of targets was positioned at 100 yards, considered a basic distance for military marksmanship. Sarah settled into a prone firing position, her body relaxed but precisely aligned. When the command came to commence firing, her first shot hit the center of the target with an accuracy that caught the attention of every instructor on the range. Shot after shot followed with mechanical precision. Sarah's breathing was controlled, her trigger pull consistent, and her follow-through textbook perfect. When the firing exercise concluded and the targets were retrieved, the results spoke for themselves. Sarah's target showed a grouping that was tighter than most of the experienced candidates had achieved. Colonel Harrison found himself staring at the target results, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with his expectations. This young woman had just outperformed trained soldiers in an exercise that required years of practice to master. The question that was beginning to form in his mind was not whether she belonged in the program, but rather where she had acquired skills that rivaled those of his best candidates. The following week brought more intensive training as Colonel Harrison decided to accelerate Sarah's evaluation. Word of her performance had spread through the base, creating a mixture of curiosity and skepticism among the staff. Some instructors were eager to see if her initial success could be sustained under increased pressure, while others remained convinced that she would eventually encounter challenges beyond her capabilities. Harrison called Sarah into his office on Monday morning. The atmosphere was different this time, less dismissive but more serious. "Miss Martinez, your performance last week was unexpected. However, basic qualification exercises are just the beginning. This week, we're going to see how you handle advanced training scenarios." Sarah sat straight in her chair, maintaining eye contact. "I understand, sir. I'm ready for whatever challenges you think are appropriate." "I hope you are," Harrison replied, "because this week you'll be training directly with my current SEAL class. These men have been here for 3 months, and they're preparing for their final evaluations. If you can keep up with them, we'll have a very different conversation about your future here. The advanced training began with a night navigation exercise through rough terrain. Teams of 4 candidates were given coordinates and required to reach multiple checkpoints using only compass and map, carrying full combat loads and maintaining radio silence. Sarah was assigned to a team with 3 SEAL candidates who had initially viewed her inclusion with barely concealed skepticism. Team leader Petty Officer Marcus Thompson was a 10-year Navy veteran who had served multiple deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. He had volunteered to have Sarah assigned to his team partly out of curiosity, and partly because he was confident that the exercise would expose whatever weaknesses had been hidden during her initial evaluation. "Listen carefully," Thompson told his team during their brief planning session. "We have 8 hours to cover 15 miles of mountainous terrain and hit 6 checkpoints. The weather forecast shows possible rain, which will make navigation more difficult and increase the risk of hypothermia. We move fast, we move quiet, and we don't wait for anyone who can't maintain the pace." The exercise began at 2200 hours under overcast skies that blocked most of the available moonlight. Thompson set an aggressive pace from the beginning, testing whether Sarah would be able to maintain the speed necessary for successful completion. The terrain was challenging even in daylight, with steep inclines, loose rock, and dense vegetation that caught at equipment and clothing. Sarah quickly demonstrated that her map reading skills matched her physical capabilities. When the team reached their first checkpoint ahead of schedule, she pointed out a route modification that would save them nearly 30 minutes on their approach to the second objective. Thompson initially resisted the suggestion, but reluctantly agreed when he verified her calculations. The modified route proved to be exactly as Sarah had predicted, allowing them to maintain their lead over the other teams while expending less energy on unnecessary elevation changes. By the time they reached the third checkpoint, Thompson had begun seeking Sarah's input on navigation decisions rather than simply expecting her to follow orders. The weather turned against them around midnight when a steady rain began falling, making the rocky terrain slippery and reducing visibility to just a few yards. This was the type of condition that often separated successful candidates from those who would be eliminated from the program. Sarah adjusted her pace to match the new conditions without losing her focus on navigation, occasionally suggesting course corrections that kept the team on target. As they approached the final checkpoint, Thompson realized that his team was more than an hour ahead of their required completion time. Sarah's navigation suggestions had not only saved time, but it also helped them avoid several dangerous areas where other teams were struggling with difficult terrain. More importantly, she had maintained the same level of alertness and physical performance throughout the exercise that she had demonstrated at the beginning. The team crossed the finish line at 5:30 hours, well ahead of the minimum time requirement and ahead of all other teams in the exercise. Thompson found himself in the unusual position of having to admit that Sarah's contributions had been essential to their success. Her performance under difficult conditions had been not just adequate, but actually superior to what he had expected from experienced candidates. Colonel Harrison was waiting at the finish line to debrief the teams. When Thompson's team arrived first, he pulled the team leader aside for a private conversation. "How did she perform out there, Thompson? Give me your honest assessment." Thompson hesitated for a moment before responding. "Sir, I have to admit that I was wrong about her. She didn't just keep up, she actually made us better. Her navigation skills are outstanding, and she never showed any signs of fatigue or stress that would have slowed us down. If I had to choose someone to have with me in a real operation, I would consider her seriously." The next challenge came 2 days later with a combat simulation exercise that required teams to assault a fortified position while under simulated enemy fire. This type of exercise tested not just physical skills, but also the ability to think clearly and execute complex maneuvers under extreme stress. Sarah was again assigned to work with experienced SEAL candidates, but this time, the scenario involved live ammunition and explosive charges that created realistic combat conditions. The exercise area was designed to simulate an enemy compound with multiple buildings, defensive positions, and civilians who had to be protected during the assault. The mission briefing revealed that the objective was to neutralize hostile forces while rescuing a captured friendly operative. Teams would be evaluated on their speed, accuracy, teamwork, and adherence to rules of engagement that prohibited harm to non-combatants. Failure in any of these areas would result in immediate elimination from the program. Sarah's role in the exercise was designated as Team Sniper, responsible for providing overwatch and engaging targets at long range, while her teammates conducted the close-quarters portion of the assault. This assignment placed enormous pressure on her marksmanship skills, since a missed shot could compromise the entire mission and potentially endanger her teammates. The exercise began at dawn with Sarah establishing a concealed position on high ground overlooking the target compound. Her assigned targets were enemy sentries positioned at distances ranging from 200 to 400 yards, requiring precision shooting under realistic field conditions with wind, lighting changes, and time pressure affecting her performance. As the assault commenced, Sarah's first shot eliminated a sentry who had been positioned to provide early warning to defenders inside the compound. The shot was taken at 350 yards in crosswind conditions, and it hit exactly where intended, allowing her teammates to advance without detection. Her second and third shots followed in rapid succession, each one hitting its target with the precision that was becoming her trademark. The close-quarters portion of the exercise unfolded flawlessly, with Sarah's overwatch preventing enemy reinforcements from reaching defensive positions. Her teammates were able to clear the compound methodically and rescue the simulated hostage without sustaining casualties or harming any of the role-playing civilians scattered throughout the scenario. When the exercise concluded, the evaluating instructors gathered to review the performance of all teams. Sarah's shooting had been recorded by spotters positioned throughout the exercise area, and the results were undeniable. She had achieved a 100% success rate on her assigned targets under conditions that had challenged even the most experienced marksmen in the program. Sergeant Rodriguez approached Colonel Harrison with the evaluation results. "Sir, I have never seen shooting like this from a new candidate. Her accuracy under pressure is exceptional, but more than that, her decision-making and timing were perfect. She understood her role in the mission and executed it flawlessly." Harrison studied the evaluation reports, trying to understand how someone with Sarah's background had developed such advanced military skills. The question was no longer whether she belonged in the program, but rather how she had achieved this level of competence without formal military training. Her performance was beginning to suggest capabilities that went far beyond what her background would normally produce. Colonel Harrison had spent 3 sleepless nights reviewing Sarah's performance records and trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. Every military instinct he had developed over 3 decades of service told him that her level of skill should not be possible without years of specialized training. Yet the evidence was undeniable, documented by multiple instructors, and verified through increasingly challenging exercises. On Friday morning, Harrison made a decision that surprised even his senior staff. He called Sarah into his office along with the top 3 SEAL candidates from the current class. These men represented the best of an already elite group, soldiers who had excelled in every phase of training and were considered certain to graduate to full SEAL status. "Miss Martinez, gentlemen," Harrison began, "I have decided to conduct a special evaluation exercise. This will be a direct competition using our most advanced marksmanship course. The scenario will simulate a hostage rescue situation with multiple targets, moving platforms, and extreme time pressure." Petty Officer Thompson, who had become something of an advocate for Sarah after their navigation exercise, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Sir, with respect, the advanced course has never been attempted by someone with less than 2 years of specialized training. The target engagement sequence requires split-second decision-making under conditions that have challenged our most experienced operators." Harrison nodded acknowledgement but continued. "The course includes civilian targets mixed with hostile targets, distance shots up to 600 yards, and a final phase that requires hitting moving targets from an unstable platform. Miss Martinez, are you willing to attempt this evaluation knowing that failure here would end your participation in this program immediately?" Sarah's response came without hesitation. "Yes, sir. I understand the stakes, and I'm prepared to be judged by the same standards you would apply to anyone else." The advanced marksmanship course had been designed to replicate the most demanding shooting scenarios that SEALs might encounter in actual operations. The exercise area covered nearly 2 square miles of varied terrain, with target positions that required candidates to move quickly between firing positions while maintaining accuracy under extreme time pressure. Word of the special evaluation had spread throughout the base, and a crowd of instructors and senior personnel gathered to observe the exercise. Many had come expecting to finally see Sarah encounter a challenge beyond her capabilities. Others were genuinely curious to see how far her abilities actually extended. The course began with a briefing that outlined a hostage scenario involving 12 targets distributed across 6 different engagement areas. Some targets represented hostiles who had to be neutralized, while others were civilians who could not be harmed under any circumstances. Candidates had to identify target types instantly and engage only appropriate targets while moving through the course under a strict time limit. The first 3 SEAL candidates tackled the course with the confidence of men who had trained extensively for exactly this type of challenge. Their performances were solid, professional, and within expected parameters for their level of experience. Each man successfully completed the course, though none achieved perfect scores due to the extreme difficulty of the final moving target sequence. Sarah approached her turn with the same quiet focus that had characterized all her previous performances. She had observed the other candidates carefully, noting their techniques and the points where they had encountered difficulties. When she stepped up to the starting position, the crowd of observers fell silent. The first engagement area required identifying and engaging 3 targets at 200 yards while distinguishing between armed hostiles and unarmed civilians positioned among them. Sarah's first shot rang out within seconds of the start signal, followed immediately by her second and third. All 3 hostile targets had been hit center mass, while the civilian targets remained untouched. She moved to the second position with fluid efficiency, covering ground quickly but maintaining the controlled movements necessary for accurate shooting. The targets at this position were partially concealed behind barriers, requiring precise shot placement to ensure effective hits while avoiding civilian bystanders. Sarah's shooting rhythm was unlike anything the observers had seen before. Each shot seemed to be part of a continuous sequence, with no wasted motion or hesitation between target identification and engagement. Her accuracy was maintaining the same standard she had demonstrated in earlier exercises, but now she was achieving it while moving rapidly through a complex course under extreme time pressure. The fourth engagement area presented the most difficult challenge yet encountered. Targets were positioned at varying distances from 300 to 500 yards, with wind conditions affecting bullet trajectory and lighting that created shadows obscuring target details. The SEAL candidates had all struggled with this portion of the course, achieving hits but requiring multiple shots to ensure target neutralization. Sarah settled into her firing position and took a moment to assess wind conditions and target priorities. Her first shot reached out to 500 yards and struck a target that the previous candidates had needed 3 attempts to hit. Her second and third shots followed with the same precision, each one finding its mark on the first attempt despite the challenging conditions. Colonel Harrison found himself leaning forward in his observation chair, unable to believe what he was watching. Sarah's performance was not just meeting the standards set by experienced SEAL candidates. She was exceeding them by margins that seemed almost impossible given her background and training history. The final challenge was considered the most difficult portion of the entire course. Candidates had to engage moving targets from a platform that was itself moving, simulating shooting from a boat or vehicle under operational conditions. The targets moved on tracks at varying speeds and distances, requiring candidates to calculate lead times while compensating for their own movement. This portion of the course had defeated many candidates who had performed well in all previous phases. The combination of multiple moving elements and strict time pressure created conditions that challenged even the most skilled marksmen. The 3 SEAL candidates had each managed to hit approximately 60% of their assigned targets, which was considered acceptable performance for this exercise. Sarah climbed onto the moving platform with the same methodical preparation she had shown throughout the exercise. The platform began its programmed movement pattern, creating an unstable firing position that required constant adjustment to maintain accuracy. The first target appeared at 250 yards, moving laterally across the engagement area at approximately 15 miles per hour. Her first shot connected perfectly, striking the moving target dead center despite the challenging conditions. The second target appeared at a greater distance and moving at a different angle, but Sarah's adjustment was seamless. Shot after shot found its mark with accuracy that seemed to defy the difficulty of the exercise. When the final target disappeared and the exercise concluded, Sarah had achieved something that no candidate had accomplished before. She had hit every assigned target on the first shot, completing the most demanding marksmanship course in the Navy SEAL training program with a perfect score. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind across the range. The crowd of observers struggled to process what they had just witnessed. This young woman, who had arrived just weeks earlier with no formal military training, had just outperformed the best candidates in one of the most elite military programs in the world. Sergeant Rodriguez approached Colonel Harrison with the official scoring results. "Sir," he said quietly, "I have been running this course for 8 years. I have never seen anything like what we just witnessed. Her performance was not just exceptional, it was unprecedented." Harrison took the results and reviewed them carefully, though the outcome had been clear to every observer. The question now was not whether Sarah belonged in the SEAL program, but rather how someone with her apparent background had developed capabilities that surpassed those of career military professionals. That evening, Colonel Harrison sat alone in his office staring at Sarah's performance evaluations spread across his desk. The numbers told a story that his 30 years of military experience couldn't explain. He had seen natural talent before, had worked with soldiers who possessed exceptional abilities, but Sarah's performance suggested something beyond natural aptitude. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he rarely used. Admiral Roberts answered after 2 rings, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to calls at all hours. "Harrison, I was wondering when you would call. How is our young candidate performing?" "Sir, I need to ask you directly. What exactly do you know about Sarah Martinez's background? Because what I'm seeing here doesn't match what should be possible for someone with her supposed training history." There was a long pause before Roberts responded. "Colonel, are you somewhere we can speak freely?" Harrison confirmed that he was alone and that his office was secure. Roberts continued with a seriousness that immediately caught Harrison's attention. "James, Sarah's father wasn't just any soldier. Master Sergeant Carlos Martinez was one of the finest special operations soldiers I ever had the privilege to command. He served with distinction in 3 different special forces units over a 15-year career." "That would explain some things, but not what I witnessed today," Harrison replied. "Admiral, she just completed our most advanced marksmanship course with a perfect score. She outperformed SEAL candidates who have been training for years." "That's because her training didn't end when her father died," Roberts said quietly. "Carlos knew he was being deployed to an extremely dangerous assignment. Before he left for his final mission, he arranged for Sarah to receive training that most military personnel never get access to." Roberts went on to explain that Carlos Martinez had used his contacts within the special operations community to provide Sarah with world-class instruction in marksmanship, tactics, and military skills. Some of the finest soldiers in the military had contributed to her education, each one honoring their commitment to a fallen comrade by ensuring his daughter received the best training possible. She spent 2 years training with a former Marine Corps sniper who held multiple long-distance shooting records. Her navigation and survival skills were taught by Army Rangers who had operated in every major conflict of the past decade. Her tactical knowledge came from Navy SEALs who wanted to honor Carlos by passing their expertise to his daughter. Harrison began to understand the scope of what had been arranged. "Sir, you're telling me that she received private instruction that was equivalent to years of military training." "Not equivalent, James. Superior. Her instructors weren't bound by standard military training protocols. They could focus entirely on developing her specific abilities without the constraints of regular military education. She received one-on-one instruction from specialists who are legends within the special operations community." The conversation explained Sarah's performance, but raised new questions about her motivations and goals. Harrison asked about her father's final mission and the circumstances that had led to this extraordinary arrangement. Robert's voice became somber as he provided the details. Carlos Martinez had been killed while leading a rescue mission to save captured American personnel. He had volunteered for an assignment that others considered nearly impossible, knowing that his specialized skills made him the best hope for bringing his fellow soldiers home safely. He had succeeded in the rescue, but had died during the extraction, giving his life to ensure that others could return to their families. Carlos made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would ensure Sarah had the opportunity to serve her country if she chose to do so, Roberts continued. He believed that she had inherited not just his skills, but also his sense of duty. Everything that has happened has been in fulfillment of that promise. Harrison found himself reconsidering everything he thought he knew about Sarah's situation. She wasn't simply an inexperienced civilian seeking adventure or trying to prove a point. She was the daughter of a war hero who had been specifically prepared for military service by some of the finest soldiers in the American military. Admiral, why wasn't I told this from the beginning? Understanding her background would have changed how I approached her evaluation. Because Carlos specifically requested that she be judged on her own merits, not on his reputation or her special training, Roberts replied. He wanted her to succeed or fail based on her actual capabilities, not because people felt obligated to honor his memory. You've now seen what she can do without any bias in her favor. The following morning, Harrison called Sarah into his office once again. This time, the atmosphere was completely different. He gestured for her to sit down and looked at her with the respect he would show to any accomplished soldier under his command. Miss Martinez, I had a conversation with Admiral Roberts last night. I now understand more about your background and the training you received before coming here. Sarah's expression remained composed, but Harrison could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. Sir, I hope my father's reputation hasn't influenced your evaluation of my performance. He always taught me that soldiers must prove themselves through their actions, not through family connections. Your father would be proud of what you've accomplished here, Harrison said firmly. But you're right about earning respect through performance. What I've seen over the past few weeks has nothing to do with who your father was. It's about who you have become through your own dedication and effort. Harrison leaned forward in his chair, his tone becoming more serious. Sarah, I'm going to be completely honest with you. Your performance has been exceptional by any standard we might apply. However, completing SEAL training is about more than individual excellence. It's about becoming part of a brotherhood that depends on absolute trust and mutual support. Sarah nodded understanding. Sir, I know that some of the men still have doubts about whether I belong here. I can only earn their trust by proving myself worthy of it over time. The men who have trained with you no longer have doubts, Harrison replied. Petty Officer Thompson specifically requested that you be assigned to his team for the final evaluation exercises. Sergeant Rodriguez has recommended you for immediate advancement to the next phase of training. You have already earned their respect through your performance. Harrison stood up and walked to his window, looking out at the training grounds where new candidates were beginning their own journey through the program. Sarah, I owe you an apology. When you first walked into this office, I allowed my preconceptions to cloud my judgment. I made assumptions about your capabilities based on factors that had nothing to do with your actual qualifications. No apology is necessary, sir, Sarah replied. Your concerns were reasonable given what you knew at the time. I understand that exceptional claims require exceptional proof. Harrison turned back to face her with a slight smile. Well, you have certainly provided that proof. The question now is whether you're prepared for the challenges that lie ahead. What we've done so far has been evaluation and basic training. The advanced phases of SEAL training will test you in ways that go beyond anything you've experienced here. Sarah's response carried the quiet confidence that had impressed everyone who had worked with her. Sir, my father always told me that the most important battles are won before the fighting begins, through proper preparation and absolute commitment to the mission. I've been preparing for this opportunity my entire life, and my commitment has never wavered. Harrison realized that his initial skepticism had been completely misplaced. Sarah wasn't just qualified for SEAL training. She was potentially one of the most promising candidates he had ever encountered. Her combination of technical skills, mental toughness, and tactical understanding suggested that she could excel at the highest levels of special operations. 6 months later, Colonel Harrison stood before a gathering of senior military officials, SEAL team leaders, and distinguished guests who had assembled for a historic graduation ceremony. The sun reflected off the water beyond the naval base as Harrison prepared to address an audience that included some of the most respected figures in American military leadership. Sarah Martinez stood at attention among 12 other candidates who had successfully completed the most demanding military training program in the United States Navy. The months following her initial evaluation had brought challenges that tested every aspect of her physical capabilities, mental toughness, and tactical knowledge. She had not merely survived these challenges, she had excelled in ways that established new standards for future candidates. The advanced phases of SEAL training had included underwater demolition exercises, advanced weapons training, survival instruction in multiple environments, and complex mission scenarios that required seamless coordination between team members. Sarah had approached each challenge with the same methodical preparation and quiet determination that had characterized her performance from the beginning. Her teammates had long since abandoned any skepticism about her capabilities. During a particularly challenging exercise in cold weather survival, Sarah had demonstrated leadership abilities that impressed even veteran instructors. When one team member had suffered hypothermia during a training evolution, Sarah had taken charge of the medical response and coordinated the team's actions in a way that potentially saved her teammate's life. Petty Officer Thompson, who had completed his own SEAL training and was now preparing for his first operational deployment, had become one of Sarah's strongest advocates. "She doesn't just meet our standards," he had told Colonel Harrison during the final evaluation period. "She has raised our standards by showing us what's possible when someone combines natural ability with absolute dedication to excellence." The graduation ceremony represented more than just personal achievement for Sarah. Her success had implications for military policy and the future of women in combat roles. Senior military leaders had been monitoring her progress closely, understanding that her performance would influence decisions about expanding opportunities for female service members in special operations units. Admiral Roberts delivered the keynote address, speaking about the evolution of military service and the importance of judging personnel based on capability rather than preconceived limitations. His remarks touched on the changing nature of modern warfare and the need for military units that could adapt to new challenges with innovation and flexibility. "Today we recognize individuals who have demonstrated the highest levels of professional competence and personal dedication," Roberts announced to the assembled crowd. "These new SEALs will carry forward traditions of excellence while also expanding our understanding of what those traditions can become in the hands of exceptional people." When Sarah's name was called to receive her SEAL insignia, the applause from her fellow graduates and the audience reflected the respect she had earned through months of outstanding performance. Colonel Harrison had the honor of presenting her with the Trident pin that marked her transition from candidate to fully qualified Navy SEAL. "Sarah Martinez," Harrison said as he pinned the insignia to her uniform, "you have not only completed this training program, you have helped us understand that excellence recognizes no boundaries except those we create for ourselves. Your father would be proud, but more importantly, your country is grateful for your service." The ceremony concluded with Sarah taking the same oath that countless SEALs had recited before her, swearing to defend the Constitution and uphold the values that defined American military service. As she spoke the words, she carried with her the memory of her father and the knowledge that his sacrifice had made this moment possible. Following the ceremony, Harrison approached Sarah for a private conversation. They walked together along the waterfront where SEAL teams conducted daily training operations, the sound of their activities a constant reminder of the operational mission that gave meaning to all the preparation and evaluation. "Sarah, I want you to know that your performance here has changed how we think about SEAL training," Harrison said. "Your success has demonstrated that our selection criteria should focus entirely on capability and performance rather than traditional assumptions about who can succeed in this program." Sarah appreciated the sentiment, but remained focused on the future rather than dwelling on past achievements. "Sir, I hope my experience here will open doors for others who have the skills and dedication to serve in special operations, regardless of their background. The most important thing is ensuring that our military has access to the best possible personnel for these critical missions." Harrison agreed completely. "The lessons we've learned from your training will be incorporated into future programs. But more than that, your example has shown other potential candidates that these opportunities exist for anyone willing to meet the standards we require." As they continued their conversation, Harrison reflected on how dramatically his perspective had changed since Sarah's first day on the base. His initial skepticism had been replaced by genuine admiration for her professional accomplishments and personal character. She had taught him that true leadership sometimes meant questioning one's own assumptions and remaining open to possibilities that challenged conventional thinking. "What are your plans now?" Harrison asked as they concluded their walk. Sarah's answer reflected the same thoughtful approach she had brought to every aspect of her training. "Sir, I hope to be assigned to an operational team where I can contribute to real missions. Everything I've learned here was preparation for the opportunity to serve alongside other SEALs in situations where our training can make a difference for our country and our fellow service members." The conversation ended with Harrison offering Sarah his continued support and mentorship as she transitioned to operational status. He had no doubt that she would continue to excel in whatever assignments lay ahead, and he looked forward to following her career as it developed. Later that evening, as Harrison sat in his office completing paperwork related to the graduation ceremony, he reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. Sarah's success had validated the military's commitment to merit-based selection, while also demonstrating the importance of remaining open to new possibilities and perspectives. The young woman who had walked into his office months earlier with a letter from Admiral Roberts had fundamentally changed his understanding of what was possible within the SEAL program. Her achievements had proven that excellence could emerge from unexpected places when combined with proper preparation, absolute dedication, and the opportunity to prove oneself under the highest standards. Sarah Martinez had not simply become a Navy SEAL. She had redefined what it meant to earn that distinction. Her legacy would extend far beyond her individual accomplishments, inspiring future generations of service members while honoring the memory of her father and the sacrifice he had made for his country. Colonel Harrison knew that he had been privileged to witness something truly historic, and he was grateful for the opportunity to have played a role in recognizing and developing such exceptional talent.